So now let's dive into the components, the part of the Windows Azure platform. And we find that it's basically made up of three main components: the compute, the management, and the storage. So the Windows Azure compute part, which is your application actually, which is the part that manages your application. Like for example, you create an application, you deploy it. This is the compute part, right? The code that you write, as we will see later, the web roles, the worker roles. You have the management part, which are the set of the component that takes care of managing your application. And finally, you have the storage part, where you can store your data. And again, in the demo that I will show you, I will cover in detail the compute part and the storage part. And next step, you have the SQL Azure, which is your relational database on the cloud. Again, in the demo application, I will also show you how you can create your own SQL Azure database and how you can connect to this database. And finally, you have the Windows Azure App Fabric, which is the middleware on the cloud. So as you can see, when you're developing a on-premises application, the traditional way of doing applications, so basically you have all these three components, however, running locally. So you have the compute, right? You have the processing, you have the web applications, you have the Windows services, you have the storage. For example, you have your own file systems to store data. You have your relational database that your applications connect to, and you have the middlewares, like for example, BizTalk server, where you can use it to connect your applications. So for each one of these flavors, you have the equivalent running on the cloud. And in this demo, I will cover these major three components, starting with the Windows Azure Compute storage, and then going into SQL Azure, and finally going into Windows Azure App Fabric. So this is time for the demo application. From now on, no more slides, and I will start creating the application. So let's start. Okay. So in order to start, I will run Visual Studio. And for you to be able to work with Windows Azure, you have to install the SDK. Of course, I have done that already. I have the Windows Azure SDK installed. So when you have the SDK installed, you get actually two components. First of all, you get these tools to work inside Visual Studio. And what you get is the set of DLLs installed for you. And these are the DLLs that are required for you to be able to talk to Windows Azure, the storage components, all the APIs needed. So you get all this by installing the SDK. So you can go online, search for Windows Azure SDK, and install it. And please note that until this moment, everything that I'm doing, you can do. There will come a time when I go to the online portal where some of you who don't have Azure accounts will not be able to follow up with me. But till now, I'm doing local development on my machine using just the Azure tools, and you can do that. So first thing I will do is that I will create something called Azure Service. Right? So what's the Azure Service? It's the deployment unit. This is the project that I will deploy to the cloud. So let me call it online service. Now when I click OK, you will notice that I will get another window asking me what type of project I want to create, because till now when I specified the online service project, this is the service project, but I haven't still created the actual project, the actual web application that I want to run. As you can see here, I have the notation of roles. So for example, I have the ASP.NET web role, which is actually a typical ASP.NET application. And for example, I have WCF role, and I have a worker role, which simulates Windows service running on your machine. And in this demo, I will create an ASP.NET web role, and I will create a worker role. Starting with the ASP.NET web role, and let me call it online web role, and click OK. So what's happening now is that you can see here, let me minimize these. I have two projects created. First of all is the online service, and I will come to this project in a moment. However, what I want to show you now is this web application. And as you can see, it's clearly an ASP.NET web application, right? It has all the ingredients of the ASP.NET web application. It has the web.config file. It has the pages created for you by default, even the account, which sets up your security, your forms of authentication security. So everything is there for you. This is the standard web.config that you can see for an ASP.NET application. There's only one part which is actually related to Windows Azure, which is the web role.cs. Okay, so what is this web role? This is your entry point of your cloud web application. So this is the only difference between a standard ASP.NET application and an ASP.NET application meant to run on the cloud, meant to run on Windows Azure. As you can see that this web role, it has something, it inherits role entry points, and it has an event called onStart. It also has onStop and all this stuff. What's important to note that this web role is the entry point of your application even before your global.asmx file. So you know that in an ASP.NET application, when you start an application, you have the the global events, application start, session start, all these stuff running for you. This all still holds in Windows Azure. However, whatever you define here in web role, this will run first. So whatever code that I write in onStart, this will be the entry point of my application, which will run the first time I run my application. So this is typically, as you can imagine, this is the place that you write any initialization code that you want to make sure is running before anyone accesses your application. And as I will start in a moment, when I start writing the code, this is the place that I will write my code to initialize the storage stuff. Okay, so any code that you want to write and you want to be executed before your application starts will go into the web role project. So this is the ASP.NET application. The only part is the web role part that you have to know about. Then I will show you the online service project. So the online service project, like I said, this is the unit of deployment. So as you can see here, I have a reference to my online web role. So this is my online web role project, and it's being referenced here inside my roles. And I can add another roles, which I will do in one moment. So this is my role now added here. And as you can see, I have two files, service definition and service configuration. So let's start with the service definition. Okay, you remember that when I was discussing the Azure architecture, I explained about the fabric controller. Okay, so this is the piece of information that the fabric controller uses in order to provision your application. So you specify here the endpoints that you are using for your application. If you are using HTTP or HTTPS, what port you are using, the module, the management, the monitoring module that you want to use in your application, and you give it to the fabric controller, and that's it. It takes care of provisioning your application on the cloud. Okay, so this is the service definition file. The service configuration file is it's called configuration. I mean, you know that I bet that when you see the word configuration, you know what does this mean. This means that this file that you can change online while your application is running, and the changes will be picked up automatically. Okay, like for example, I have here one very important piece of configuration, which is the instance count. Like for example, if I deploy this application as is now, I will get one instance, which means that I will have one instance of my application running online. But if I want to have it load balanced, I will specify two instances, and just like that, I will have my application load balanced on two separate VMs, on two separate machines. Okay, great. So before starting the actual coding, what I will do is that I will show you an image here to explain to you the scenario that I'm going to use in this demo. And the scenario is as follows. I will have an ASP.NET web role. Okay, so this is my ASP.NET application. It will be talking to a table storage a blob storage, and a queue storage. Now, you remember that I said that in Windows Azure I have the compute and I have storage? Well, the ASP.NET Web role and the worker role are the compute parts. These are my applications. The storage part is divided into three different components. I have a table storage where you can store rows. It's similar but very different to what you used to use, for example, in SQL Server table, where I have a table and I have set of attributes and I can store data in a row format. This is the table storage. But again, keep in mind that this is very different than relational tables, and we can discuss that later. And I have a blob storage where I can store huge data. For example, in traditional applications, you usually use the file system to store bulk of data. In the cloud, you have blob storage. And you have the queue storage, where, for example, in traditional applications, you have, for example, MSMQ. When we're talking with Windows Azure, you have the queue storage. So these are these three storage components, and these are the two, the web role and the worker role, these are the two compute components. So the scenario goes as follows. From the web role, I will insert some information, event information inside the table storage. And then I will insert a picture inside the blob storage. I will get a URI back and I will update the table storage with this URI. So I believe that you should be familiar with this pattern. When we are storing information, you usually don't store large data inside your table, right? So for example, in SQL Server, if you want to store, like for example, 1 gig media file, what you do is that you store the information of the file in a table. You store the file in the file system, you get a reference back to this file, like for example the URI of this file, and you store this URI as a pointer inside the table. I'm doing the same pattern here. Okay, and finally I'm storing a message inside the queue. I will have the worker role talking to the queue, getting a message from the queue, and again updating the table. Now don't worry, I know this is confusing. I just wanted to show you the components that I will be using first. But this will be more clear when I run the demo. Okay, I will create the complete demo and show you everything working. Great. Now going back to my application, let's start writing the code. So like I said, I will start writing whatever code I want to run on the web role. This is the place where I will initialize my application, so that I don't have to write the full code and take time and maybe I will miss something. I have prepared for the full demo. I have prepared the working version of it, as I usually do, and I will copy the code from here to here. But I will not do this always. I will write some code, but the initialization code, as you can see, it's a lengthy code, so I will not write it live. I will take it from here, paste it here, and let's see what's happening. And let me reference the namespace that is required to talk to the storage library. So, first of all, I'm reading the configuration setting from my configuration. I will come back to this point. And see this code here, and although it might be new to you, it's really intuitive. You know, you can just read it. Like for example, here I'm creating a table. I'm creating a table called events. I'm creating a queue called events, and I'm creating a blob called events. Again, remember this scenario. I need a table, I need a blob, and I need a queue. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating the table, I'm creating the blob, and I'm creating the queue here, and I'm creating the blob here. So why I'm using this code in the web role? Because I want this code to run when I first initialize my application. Now let's run the application, and I know that I will be facing a runtime error. I want to show you this error before correcting it. So as you can see here in Visual Studio,